I knew the knife was coming the second he called me into the glass-walled fishbowl they called a conference room. You don't get summoned like that for good news. It's the corporate version of a priest knocking at your door in the middle of the night. He didn't even let me sit before dropping it. "We're letting you go. Nothing personal." My chair hadn't even warmed up yet when he leaned back. That smug half smile like he'd just won a game of poker I didn't know we were playing. "And hey," he added, voice dripping with condescension, "I won't even contest your unemployment. That's just the kind of guy I am." I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I could taste copper. No speech, no begging, no but after all I've done. Just a nod, a polite "I understand," and I stood to leave. The box of belongings was already waiting for me like they'd been timing how long it would take to pack my life into cardboard. My coworkers pretended to focus on their screens, but I could feel the sidelong glances, the ones that said better than me. You don't give them the satisfaction. You walk out steady, face neutral, like this isn't the day they dropped a guillotine on your career. Inside, though, I was burning, controlled, quiet, and deliberate, like a fuse waiting to reach the dynamite. He thought this was mercy. He thought that little "I won't contest it" line made him a benevolent king instead of a petty tyrant. All it did was give me the tiniest legal thread I'd need to pull until his whole empire unraveled. I carried my box through the lobby, past the receptionist who suddenly found something fascinating in her stapler, past the motivational poster about teamwork that felt like a personal insult. The automatic doors hissed open, and the cold air slapped me in the face. That was the moment I decided. If I was leaving a landmine behind. Not the kind that blows up immediately. The kind that sits in the dirt for weeks, maybe months, before someone steps on it and the whole ground gives way. It wasn't revenge in the sneak back in with spray paint kind of way. That's for amateurs. My kind of revenge is quiet, methodical, impossible to trace back unless you know where to look. And after 10 years in operations, I knew exactly where to look. I knew where the bodies were buried, not literal ones, but the kind with signatures and pay stubs. Numbers that didn't match. Contractors who sat in the office every day like employees, but somehow weren't on the books. Bonuses paid under miscellaneous categories. My entire job had been to make sure the wheels kept turning smoothly. That meant I saw everything. Every shady decision disguised as cost saving. Every pay discrepancy waved off with "just fix it in the system." Most people wouldn't know how to explain it if they spotted it. I could diagram it in my sleep. And now, walking to my car with my little box of corporate leftovers, I realized I didn't even have to lift a finger to expose it. I just had to wait for the right request. The CEO thought firing me was the end of it. To him, I was gone, raced from his daily world in under 5 minutes. But for me, that was just the opening move. I didn't need to rush. I didn't need to send an angry email or make some big social media post. I just needed to wait for the system to do what it always does when someone applies for unemployment, ask for the paperwork. And when that moment came, I'd hand them exactly what they asked for, nothing more, nothing less. Walking into my apartment that night, the box felt lighter than it had in the office. I set it down, poured a drink, and sat in silence. The humiliation was still there, humming under my skin, but over it was something sharper. A plan. I'd bide my time, keep my hands clean, and when the opportunity presented itself, I'd slide the truth across a desk so quietly no one would hear it, until it detonated. The envelope from the state unemployment office showed up 3 days after my exit. Plain white. Official seal in the corner. The kind of mail you open standing over the kitchen counter because it looks too bureaucratic to be anything fun. Inside was a polite little letter, half government formality, half veiled threat, requesting my detailed pay history for the past several years. They wanted everything: gross pay, deductions, contractor invoices, bonuses, dates worked, and any irregular payments. I stood there holding the paper, reading it twice, a slow smile creeping across my face. This was it. This was the exact moment I'd been waiting for, even if I didn't know it the day I walked out of that glass-walled room. Most people in my position would sigh, dig through their old pay stubs, and maybe call HR for a copy of their W-2s. But my role was different. I wasn't just some employee who got a paycheck every 2 weeks. I approved payroll. I cross-checked invoices. I signed off on contractor hours. Every discrepancy, every little "oh, just fudge that number so it's under the threshold," had passed through my hands. Not because I agreed with it, but because my job was to keep the machine running, and in a place like that, you either approve the gears or you get crushed between them. And now, with one sterile government request, the entire contents of my mental filing cabinet had just become relevant. The CEO thought he could fire me, wipe his hands, and walk away. He forgot that every questionable move, every creative accounting decision he made to save a buck, had been quietly logged by me. I didn't have to accuse him of anything. I didn't have to write a single damning sentence. All I had to do was give them what they'd asked for. Cold, factual, complete. The paper would speak louder than any speech I could make. I pulled out my old laptop, the one they never bothered to ask back for, probably because they didn't realize how much of the payroll history I'd saved on it. Years of data sat there in neat, labeled folders. Employee rosters that never matched the tax filings. Contractors whose contract periods mysteriously lasted 3 years straight. Bonuses paid as equipment reimbursements. The patterns were so obvious that even someone with a high school understanding of accounting would see the problem. I opened the spreadsheet templates I used to maintain and started plugging in the numbers exactly as they appeared in the official records. No editing, no notes in the margins, no explanations. Just the truth in neat rows and columns. If they asked for all payments to contractors from January 1st, 20XX to present, they got every single payment. If a line item looked ridiculous, like $4,800 every other Friday to the same independent contractor for miscellaneous services, well, that wasn't my problem to explain. The more I entered, the calmer I felt. This wasn't about rage anymore. It wasn't even about humiliation. It was about precision, about knowing exactly where the weak spot was in the walls he thought were made of stone. And here's the thing, this wasn't just some dump of paperwork into a government inbox. The unemployment office doesn't sit on anomalies like that. They route them, they flag them. Sometimes they share them, which means this little packet of pure, unadulterated truth I was building could end up in the hands of people with badges and subpoenas. By the time I finished for the night, I had 3 years of payroll history lined up like dominoes, just waiting for the right agency to tip them over. I closed the laptop, slid the letter back into its envelope, and placed it neatly on the counter. I didn't need to tell anyone what I was about to do. The beauty of this was that I wasn't doing anything. I was just answering a question, fully, accurately, and on time. What they decided to do with that answer? Well, that was going to be his problem, not mine. It took me 3 full evenings to finish compiling the data. Not because it was difficult, my system for tracking payroll was a masterpiece of organization, because I refused to send anything that wasn't flawless. Every date, every dollar, every vendor code had to be exactly as it appeared in the official records. If the state was going to look at this, I wanted them to see the company's truth, not my version of it. The trick was making sure the truth was impossible to spin. I started with the employee roster archives. Year after year, the same names popped up under independent contractor status, clocking 40-hour weeks, sitting at desks in the office, receiving stipends that looked suspiciously like salaries. The IRS might tolerate a little creative classification here and there, but this wasn't creativity, it was a pattern. A deliberate one. And I had every instance logged. Then came the bonuses. Not listed as bonuses, of course, those are taxable. No, these were equipment reimbursements or travel advances, even when the recipient never traveled further than the breakroom fridge. I matched the entries with their approval emails, each one signed digitally by either the CFO or the CEO himself. The underreported earnings section was my personal favorite. That's where the magic happened. Employees officially making $48,000 on paper, but somehow living like they cleared double. The explanation was always the same in the office. We keep it off the books so it doesn't hit payroll taxes. Translation, theft from the government dressed up as fiscal savvy. As I entered each number into the master spreadsheet, I was careful to keep my own fingerprints off the narrative. No bold text, no red highlights, no C. Notes in the margins, just clean, neutral data, like a surgical blade, sharp but not flashy. The more invisible my hand, the deadlier the cut. When the sheet was finally complete, it was a thing of beauty. Tab after tab, all formatted identically. Every column labeled in plain language. You could hand it to a rookie investigator on their first day and they'd spot the violations in minutes. And that was the point, I didn't need to shout. The numbers would do the shouting for me. I went through it line by line one last time, hunting for typos or formatting errors. There were none. I saved it in 3 formats, Excel, PDF, and CSV, because I knew different agencies had different preferences. Each file got a clean. Factual name, payroll history 20XX 20XX full. No inside jokes, no winks, just professional compliance. Then came the submission. The unemployment office's online portal had a little attach files button next to the request form. I uploaded each version of the spreadsheet, watched the green check marks appear, and clicked submit. No fanfare, no final speech. Just a quiet click that felt louder in my head than any slammed door ever could. As soon as the confirmation screen popped up, I closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. That was it. The trap was set. I hadn't made a single accusation, hadn't broken a single law. I'd simply given the state exactly what they'd asked for, down to the last cent. The best part was that no one would see it coming. To the CEO, I was just another disgruntled former employee fading into the background. He'd probably forgotten my name already, but I knew the moment those files landed on the right desk, the questions would start. And once they started, they wouldn't stop until they reached the top, his top. Some traps spring instantly. This one was going to take its time, creeping in like a slow leak. You don't hear it at first. Then one day you realize the floor's gone soft under your feet, and by then, it's far too late to fix. 2 weeks after I'd hit submit, the first ripple reached the shore. Former coworker, one of the few who'd text me without checking if it was safe first, sent a simple message, "You won't believe who's here." I called her during my lunch break, keeping my voice casual like we were talking about the weather. She didn't bother with greetings. State auditors, 3 of them. Suits, badges, the whole deal. They're in the big conference room with HR right now. I could hear the muffled hum of the office in the background, the click of keyboards, tension in her voice like everyone was typing slower than usual. Apparently, they'd walked in just after 9 o'clock a.m., each carrying a slim black folder and wearing that neutral, unreadable look people get when they've already decided what they're going to find. Reception had barely finished saying, "Can I help you?" before one of them showed an ID and asked for the CEO by name. The request was polite, but it wasn't a request. And how did His Majesty take it? By turning it into a performance, of course. She said he strolled out of his office, shook their hands like they were old golfing buddies, and cracked a joke loud enough for the bullpen to hear. Audits, huh? These things happen. Like it was a casual pop quiz and he was the teacher who'd seen it all before. That was his first mistake. I could picture him leaning back in his leather chair, flashing that PR smile, thinking he'd win them over in 10 minutes. What he didn't realize was that these weren't tax season CPAs here to check if the copier toner had been expensed correctly. These were state labor auditors. The kind who don't laugh at CEO jokes because they're already flipping to the section of their notes marked violations. From what my friend could see, they didn't bother with the small talk. They laid their folders out on the table, opened to pre-printed tabs, and started asking for records. Payroll for the past 5 years, contractor agreements, tax filings, benefits eligibility reports. HR kept ducking out to check the files, which was code for frantically printing and reprinting documents they wished didn't exist. The office, usually a steady hum of chatter and clacking keyboards, had turned into something else entirely. A hush broken only by the occasional phone ringing and the too loud slam of a filing cabinet. People who'd been laughing over coffee 10 minutes before were now suddenly very busy at their desks. I listened, pretending to be sympathetic, but inside I felt that cool, steady hum again, the one that had carried me through compiling those spreadsheets. This wasn't the explosion. Not yet. This was just the fuse getting lit. The CEO could strut and smirk all he wanted, but once the right set of eyes looked at those minor inconsistencies, his script wouldn't hold up. When I hung up, I didn't race to make more calls. I didn't post cryptic messages online. I just went back to my lunch, chewing slowly, thinking about how storms never announce themselves with a lightning strike. They start with the air getting heavier, the sky dimming a little, the wind shifting. That's what this was, the air pressure dropping. And the best part, they still had no idea where the storm was coming from. From what I heard later, the scene in the boardroom was almost cinematic. The auditors had wrapped up their first round of requests and were sitting quietly, their folders open like they were playing poker with a winning hand. In walked the company's outside counsel, a man who usually arrived in a cloud of cologne and false confidence, the kind of lawyer who thought a tailored suit could intimidate regulators. He took his seat next to the CEO, made a show of smoothing his tie, and started flipping through the opening packet the auditors had handed over. At first, he was all business, eyes scanning, pen tapping against the table, the occasional nod as if confirming that yes, this was all routine. Then, somewhere around the halfway mark, his movements slowed. Nestled between the payroll summaries and contractor agreements was my unemployment filing. Not just tossed in, either it was highlighted, tabbed with a neon flag like the auditors were saying. You'll want to pay special attention to this one. Attached to it were the spreadsheets I'd submitted, laid out in full color. Every row, every dollar, every suspicious pattern, right there in black and white. The lawyer's pen stopped tapping. He leaned in closer, reading more slowly now, the creases in his forehead deepening. And then, this was the moment I like picturing most, he set the papers down. Not like you set down something finished, but like you've just realized you're holding something that's about to detonate and you don't want your fingerprints on it. Someone told me his jaw actually tightened before he looked up at the CEO. No smirk, no "we've got this covered" speech. Just a long, assessing stare, the kind you give someone when you've just realized they've been walking blindfolded toward a cliff and you're already too close to pull them back. The CEO, oblivious, apparently tried to lighten the mood. "What? It's just payroll stuff, right?" But the lawyer didn't answer right away. He glanced at the auditors who were sitting there politely, waiting. The silence in that room must have been thick enough to cut. I wasn't there, of course, but imagining it was easy. I could see the color starting to drain from the CEO's face, the first flicker of doubt crossing his features as his legal safety net hesitated. I could almost hear the shift in the room. Way the power dynamic tilts when someone who's supposed to be on your side suddenly starts choosing their words very carefully. When I got the story later, I didn't smile or laugh out loud. I just pictured that moment like pressing play on a mental movie. I could rewind any time I wanted. The first crack had formed in his armor, and he didn't even know how deep it went yet. All he knew was that something in that packet had stopped his lawyer cold, and that whatever it was, it had my name printed right at the top. The way it was told to me, the pause after the lawyer set those papers down lasted longer than anyone in that room was comfortable with. You could hear the faint hum of the air vent, the click of someone's pen cap in the corner, the shifting of a chair as one of the auditors crossed their legs. The CEO leaned back slightly, still wearing that I've got this grin, waiting for the reassurance he was sure was coming. Instead, the lawyer leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes fixed directly on him. His voice, normally so smooth and unshakable, came out low, and this is the part that made me savor it, unsteady. "This isn't an audit," he said, each word deliberate like dropping stones into still water. "This is a criminal investigation." There was no dramatic gasp. No one knocked over their coffee. The room didn't erupt in chaos. It just went still. The kind of stillness that happens when the air gets pulled out of a place, and everyone suddenly becomes aware of the sound of their own breathing. The CEO's smirk slipped. Not all at once, but like a slow fade, corners of his mouth twitching, eyes narrowing, a flicker of calculation passing over his face as he realized that the script in his head didn't fit the scene anymore. He tried to play it off, of course. Criminal investigation? Over payroll? A little laugh, too sharp, too quick. But the lawyer didn't join in. He didn't even look away. He just repeated, slower this time, criminal investigation. And then, almost as an afterthought, they have probable cause. That phrase, probable cause, has a way of changing the temperature in a room. It's not theoretical. It's not a warning. It's the legal equivalent of saying they already believe you've committed a crime and they're here to prove it. I imagined the silence that followed. The CEO glancing toward HR, maybe toward the CFO if he was in the room, searching for someone to jump in and contradict the lawyer. No one did, because when your own counsel says it like that, you don't argue, you start calculating how bad it could get. Somewhere, in a folder right in front of them, was the data I'd sent. Clean, orderly, undeniable. I wasn't in that room, but my fingerprints were all over the moment. I was the ghost at the table, the unseen voice that had just changed the stakes from a nuisance to life-altering. They didn't know it yet, but they'd just crossed a line there was no walking back from. And I didn't need to be anywhere near the building to feel the shift. I could sense it from miles away. By midweek, the office didn't feel like an office anymore. It felt like a crime scene where the bodies were spreadsheets, and the yellow tape was a "do not enter" sign taped to the big conference room door. The investigators had set up camp in there, laptops open, stacks of binders spread out like they were about to dissect the entire company's history, one paper cut at a time. Two other conference rooms were commandeered for interviews. Employees were pulled in one by one, sometimes coming out 10 minutes later looking pale, sometimes staying in there for over an hour. No one made eye contact on the way back to their desks. The first seizures started that Thursday. IT was told to bring every desktop tower from HR and payroll into the conference room. Laptops were stacked in neat, depressing rows. External drives were tagged and bagged. Even the CEO's computer disappeared behind that closed door, carried by an investigator with the casual confidence of someone who already knew what they'd find on it. And then the subpoenas started landing. Not just for employees, contractors too. Ones who'd been independent for years but were on site more than the cleaning crew. Some of them got served at their homes. Others, humiliatingly, had the paperwork handed to them at their desks. One poor guy apparently got his while in the middle of eating lunch in the break room, sandwich halfway to his mouth. HR was in meltdown mode. They sent out urgent internal emails asking for updated copies of contractor agreements, tax forms, and payment approvals. Translation: we can't find the originals and we're desperate enough to hope you still have them somewhere. People whispered about it in the bathrooms, in the stairwells, outside by the loading dock while pretending to smoke just so they could gossip without being overheard. From my distance, miles away, sitting on my couch with my coffee, it was like watching a slow-motion building collapse. The beams were cracking, the dust was starting to rise, but the whole thing hadn't hit the ground yet. I didn't feel giddy, I didn't feel vengeful. What I felt was satisfied detachment. This was the exact sequence I'd pictured when I pressed submit on that file. Not instant fireworks, but an unraveling. A quiet dismantling of something that had stood for too long on lies and arrogance. The CEO was still showing up every day, but word was he spent more time behind his closed door than out in the open. No more jokes about these things happen. No more public confidence. If he smiled, it was thin and quick, the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. And I just knew that behind that door, he was starting to realize the most dangerous person in this whole story wasn't the auditors, or the investigators, or even his own lawyer. It was the person who wasn't there at all. By the end of the month, the whispers had turned into full-blown rumors that clung to the walls like smoke. It started with vague phrases, serious trouble, legal exposure, but quickly sharpened into specifics. Felony labor violations, tax fraud, potential prison sentences, fines in the millions. The kind of charges that don't end with a slap on the wrist and a stern lecture, but with your name scrolling across the evening news under the words "breaking story." The investigators were still on site almost daily. People who once bragged about being untouchable now avoided the building entirely, using remote work as a shield. The parking lot, once packed, had empty rows by mid-morning. Those who did show up kept their heads down, eyes averted, moving like shadows between their desks and the break room. I started getting more messages from former coworkers, some from people I hadn't spoken to in years. The tone was cautious at first, like they weren't sure how much they could say over text. "So, you probably know what's going on here. Or I think I finally get why you didn't fight the firing." They'd sprinkle in little updates, some almost conspiratorial. "The CFO's been in with legal for 4 hours straight. 2 more contractors got subpoenas yesterday. He looks different, not sick exactly, just cornered. I didn't confirm anything. I didn't deny anything either." My responses were polite, short, deliberately unhelpful. I wasn't here to bask in their newfound admiration or confession that maybe they'd misjudged me. The truth was, their approval meant nothing now. They were just spectators, realizing too late that they'd been watching the wrong game. The CEO's public image was cracking, too. He'd stopped posting his usual LinkedIn self-congratulations, the ones about leadership in challenging times and navigating growth. His once weekly all-staff emails had dried up entirely. The only official communication employees received now came from HR, and those were short, bloodless notices about ongoing cooperation with state authorities. From where I sat, legs up, coffee in hand, the whole thing was quiet poetry. I didn't need to brag about the part I'd played. I didn't need to post cryptic quotes or drop hints. The beauty of it was that the results spoke louder than I ever could. The building was rotting from the inside out, and all I'd done was hand over the truth to the right people at the right time. They didn't know exactly how it had started. Most of them never would, but I did, and knowing was enough. Because the final blow was coming, and when it landed, it wouldn't just bruise, it would break. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of damp, gray morning that makes everything feel heavier. By the time most of the staff were still on their first coffee, the building's front entrance was lit up by the red and blue strobe of unmarked police vehicles. A handful of plainclothes investigators stepped inside, their pace brisk and unhesitating. They weren't here to ask questions anymore, they were here to collect. From the sidewalk across the street, a local news crew angled their camera just right, catching the moment the CEO emerged. His jacket was pulled up over his head, shielding his face, but the way he moved, stiff, hunched, told everyone watching that the performance was over. He didn't say a word. One investigator guided him toward the waiting car with a hand on his arm. The click of the cuffs was lost under the sound of camera shutters. Within an hour, every major business outlet in the state was running the same headline: Tech CEO arrested in multi-million-dollar payroll fraud scheme. The subheadlines spelled it out in grim detail: years of systematic contractor misclassification, millions in unpaid taxes, deliberate evasion of labor laws. Words like felony, racketeering, and criminal conspiracy weren't whispered rumors anymore, they were in bold print. The articles quoted sources close to the investigation saying the paper trail had been meticulous, airtight, stretching back years. They mentioned that a key trigger for the investigation had been payroll records supplied as part of an unrelated unemployment claim. No names were attached to that detail, but I knew, and if the CEO read it, he knew too. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee steaming in front of me, reading the headline twice before setting the mug down and leaning back. The photo accompanying the story, a grainy still of him being let out, collar up, head down, wasn't the kind of image you recover from. Not in business, not in life. There was no rush of adrenaline, no triumphant fist pump. Just a slow, deep exhale, the kind you release when something long and heavy has finally been put down. Closure doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it's the quiet satisfaction of knowing you placed a single stone that started an avalanche. I hadn't broken a law. I hadn't fabricated a thing. I just answered a request with the truth, fully and precisely. That truth had done what I knew it would. It found the cracks, widened them, and eventually brought the whole structure down. Outside, the clouds hung low and the day carried on like any other. But for him, the world had tilted. And for me, the chapter was closed. The empire he'd built on arrogance and shortcuts was gone, and all it had taken to start the collapse was one neat, complete pay history file. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.